The sun shined brightly over the small town of Oak Ridge, Montana on that Saturday afternoon in May. The parking lot of Franklin Foods grocery store was nearly full. Cars lined up in neat rows as families did their weekly shopping. It was a normal day in every way, the kind that blends into hundreds of others in memory. No one could have known that this ordinary Saturday would soon be marked as the day that changed everything for the Bennett family. Karen Bennett pushed her shopping cart down the produce aisle, picking up a head of lettuce and checking it for brown spots. Her 8-year-old daughter Lily stood beside her, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, clearly bored with the shopping trip. "Mom, can I go look at the candy?" Lily asked, her bright green eyes looking up hopefully. She twirled one of her auburn pigtails around her finger, a habit she had when she wanted something. Karen glanced at her daughter and smiled. Lily was wearing her favorite yellow t-shirt with a rainbow on the front and blue jeans with flower patches that Karen had sewn on when Lily had torn them climbing trees last month. "Okay, but just to look," Karen said. "We'll see about buying something after we finish getting the things on our list." Lily's face lit up. "Thanks, Mom." She bounced on her toes in excitement. "Stay in the candy aisle," Karen reminded her. "I'll come find you in 5 minutes after I finish with the vegetables. I promise," Lily said, already turning to go. Karen watched her daughter skip away, her pigtails bouncing with each step. It was something they had done many times before. Franklin Foods wasn't a large store, and everyone in town knew each other. Oak Ridge had a population of just under 5,000 people, and was the kind of place where folks left their doors unlocked at night. Karen never worried about letting Lily wander to the candy aisle alone. The store was safe. The town was safe. Karen turned her attention back to her shopping list. She needed to get tomatoes, carrots, and potatoes for the stew she was planning to make for dinner. Greg, her husband, would be home from his shift at the factory by 6, and he loved her beef stew. As she selected the vegetables and placed them in her cart, she thought about the weekend ahead. Maybe they could drive to the lake tomorrow if the weather stayed nice. After gathering all the produce she needed, Karen checked her watch. 7 minutes had passed since Lily had gone to the candy aisle. She pushed her cart in that direction, turning down the snack food aisle first and then into the adjacent candy section. The aisle was empty. "Lily?" Karen called, looking up and down the shelves lined with colorful packages of sweets. No answer came. She wasn't worried yet. Lily might have wandered to the toy section instead, even though she had been told to stay with the candy. Karen pushed her cart to the small toy section at the back of the store. "Lily?" she called again, a bit louder this time. Still no sign of her daughter. Karen's heart began to beat a little faster. She walked more quickly now, checking each aisle as she passed. "Excuse me," she said to a young man stocking shelves in the cereal aisle. "Have you seen a little girl with red hair and pigtails wearing a yellow shirt? She's 8 years old." The employee shook his head. "No, ma'am, I haven't." "Did she wander off?" "She was just going to the candy aisle while I finished in produce," Karen said, her voice rising slightly. "She knows not to leave the store." "Let me help you look," the employee offered, putting down the box of cereal he was holding. For the next 10 minutes, Karen and now 2 store employees searched every aisle, the restrooms and even the storage areas in the back. Lily was nowhere to be found. The store manager, a balding man named Mr. Peters who had known the Bennett family for years, approached Karen as she stood near the front of the store, her hands shaking. "Karen, we're going to lock down the store and check every corner," he said firmly. "I've already called the police." Karen nodded, unable to speak as fear gripped her throat. This couldn't be happening. Not in Oak Ridge, not to her family. "Let's check the security cameras," Mr. Peters suggested, guiding Karen to the small office at the back of the store. The security system was basic, with just 4 cameras covering the main areas of the store. Mr. Peters rewound the footage and they watched the grainy black and white video. There was Lily, skipping toward the candy aisle just as Karen had remembered. Then, 3 minutes later, the camera showed Lily walking toward the side exit of the store. "Why would she go that way?" Karen whispered. "She knows not to leave." The camera angle didn't show if Lily left alone or if someone was with her. The side exit led to an alley beside the store where deliveries were made during the week. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Dan White took initial statements while Detective Joe Miller, the town's only detective, reviewed the security footage. Karen called Greg, who was at work at the lumber mill on the edge of town. "Lily's missing," she said when he answered, her voice breaking. "I can't find her, Greg. She's gone." Greg arrived at the store 20 minutes later, his face pale with fear. By then, more officers had joined the search, and neighbors who had heard about the missing girl began to gather outside the store, ready to help look for Lily. Detective Miller, a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much sadness, organized the volunteers into search parties. "We'll cover every inch of this town," he promised Karen and Greg. "Every house, every yard, every wooded area." As the afternoon wore on with no sign of Lily, the FBI was called in. Special Agent Pam Foster arrived from the field office in Helena, bringing more resources and expertise in child abduction cases. The Bennett's home phone was connected to recording equipment in case a ransom call came. None did. Night fell over Oak Ridge, and the search continued with flashlights cutting through the darkness. Karen and Greg sat in plastic chairs in the back office of Franklin Foods, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Their eyes were red from crying, their voices hoarse from calling Lily's name. "This is my fault," Karen whispered. "I let her go alone." Greg put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "No, it's not. We've done that 100 times before. This is a safe town." "Was a safe town," Karen corrected him. By morning, Lily's picture was on every local news station. Her school photo showed a smiling girl with a gap where she had recently lost a front tooth. The story spread quickly to national news. America woke up to learn about the little girl who had vanished from a grocery store in Montana. The police interviewed everyone who had been in the store that day. They checked the alibis of known offenders in the county. They looked into every car that had been in the parking lot, tracing license plates and questioning drivers. 3 days after Lily disappeared, a red hair ribbon was found in the woods 2 miles from town. Karen identified it as Lily's. The area was searched thoroughly, but nothing else was found. A week passed. Then, too, the national news moved on to other stories. The FBI scaled back their presence in Oak Ridge, but Detective Miller remained dedicated, working the case every day, following up on every tip that came in, no matter how unlikely. Karen and Greg took turns breaking down. When Karen was able to function, making calls to the police for updates, or posting new flyers around town, Greg would be curled up in Lily's bed holding her stuffed bear and sobbing. When Greg managed to return to work for a few hours, Karen would sit in her car in the Franklin Foods parking lot, staring at the side exit where Lily was last seen. The entire town of Oak Ridge changed after Lily Bennett disappeared. Doors were locked at night. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised. Parents held their kids' hands tightly in public places. A kind of innocence was lost, not just for the Bennett family, but for everyone. As spring turned to summer, hope began to fade, but Karen refused to give up. "She's out there somewhere," she told Detective Miller. "I can feel it. My baby is alive, and someday she'll come home." Miller nodded, wanting to believe her. He kept Lily's case file on his desk, opening it every morning, reviewing the evidence, hoping to find something they had missed. But as the days grew longer and warmer, the trail grew colder. The mystery of what happened to the little girl in the yellow shirt remained unsolved, hanging over the town of Oak Ridge like a dark cloud that refused to move on. 1 year passed since Lily Bennett disappeared from Franklin Foods grocery store. The seasons changed, children grew taller, and life in Oak Ridge tried to return to normal. But for Karen and Greg Bennett, time seemed frozen on that May afternoon. When their daughter vanished, Detective Joe Miller sat at his desk, staring at the case file that had grown thick with reports, interviews, and dead-end leads. His office walls were covered with maps, timelines, and pictures of Lily. The latest addition was an age progression photo showing what Lily might look like now, at 9 years old. The FBI had created it, adding subtle changes to her features, while keeping her bright green eyes and the small birthmark behind her right ear. Miller rubbed his tired eyes. He was supposed to have retired 6 months ago, but he couldn't leave with Lily's case unsolved. It haunted him, keeping him awake at night. In 30 years of police work, he had never felt so personally connected to a case. The phone on his desk rang, startling him out of his thoughts. "Detective Miller," he answered. "Joe, it's Karen Bennett." Her voice sounded different these days, harder, like something inside her had turned to stone. "Karen, what can I do for you?" Miller asked, sitting up straighter. "I'm starting a foundation," she said, "for finding missing children. I'm calling it Find Lily. I want to help other families and keep Lily's case in people's minds." Miller nodded, even though Karen couldn't see him. "That's a good idea. I've been invited to speak on national morning news next week," Karen continued. "They're doing a segment on missing children. I thought, maybe if more people see Lily's face, someone will remember something." "I think that's wise," Miller said. "The more exposure, the better chance we have." After hanging up, Miller looked at the calendar on his desk. Exactly 1 year and 2 months since Lily disappeared. The initial flood of tips had slowed to a trickle. The FBI had moved on to other cases. The search parties had stopped. But Miller kept pushing forward, reviewing old interviews, checking national databases for similar cases, and sending Lily's information to police departments across the country. Across town, Karen Bennett sat in what used to be Lily's bedroom. She had kept it exactly as it was the day Lily disappeared. The unmade bed with its purple comforter, stuffed animals arranged on the pillows, books stacked on the nightstand, a shrine to her missing daughter. Greg no longer came into this room. He couldn't bear it. Their marriage had fallen apart in the months after Lily vanished. Greg had turned to alcohol to numb his pain, staying late at bars and missing work. Karen had thrown herself into the search, leaving no room for grief or healing or anything else in her life. They still lived in the same house, but they rarely spoke. They were like ghosts haunting the same space, connected only by their shared loss. Karen picked up Lily's favorite teddy bear, a worn brown toy with one eye missing. She held it to her chest as she rehearsed what she would say on national television next week. "My daughter Lily Bennett disappeared from Franklin Foods grocery store in Oak Ridge, Montana on May 15th last year," she practiced, her voice steady. "She was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a rainbow on it and blue jeans. She has bright green eyes and auburn hair. If you've seen her, please call the number on your screen." Karen had repeated these words so many times they had lost their emotional impact. She said them now like someone reading a grocery list, not like a mother describing her missing child. The pain was still there, buried deep, but she had learned to function around it. In his small apartment on the other side of town, Greg Bennett sat alone in the dark, an empty bottle on the table beside him. The TV played quietly, showing a baseball game he wasn't watching. On the wall hung a family photo taken at Christmas, 6 months before Lily disappeared. They looked happy, normal. Greg couldn't remember what that felt like anymore. His phone buzzed with a text from his boss. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow if you're going to be late again." Greg didn't respond. He had already lost everything that mattered. A job seemed meaningless in comparison. The next morning, Detective Miller arrived at the station to find a fax waiting for him. A child matching Lily's description had been spotted at a mall in Seattle, nearly 500 miles away. Miller's heart raced as he read the report. The girl had been with a couple who hurried her away when security approached them. Mall cameras had captured blurry images of the three. Miller studied the pictures. The quality was poor, but the girl did have reddish hair. He couldn't be sure it was Lily, but it was the best lead they'd had in months. He immediately called the Seattle Police Department and booked a flight for that afternoon. Karen was packing for her trip to New York for the television appearance when Miller called. "There's been a possible sighting in Seattle," he told her. "I'm flying out today to check it personally." Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the phone. "Do you think it's her? Really her?" "I don't want to get your hopes up," Miller said carefully. "But it's worth looking into." "I'll come with you," Karen said, already reaching for her car keys. "No," Miller said firmly. "Keep your TV appointment. That's important too. I'll call you as soon as I know anything." Karen reluctantly agreed. After hanging up, she sat on her bed, trying to control her breathing. This wasn't the first potential sighting of Lily. There had been others, all leading nowhere. She couldn't let herself hope too much. Hope was dangerous. It made the disappointment more painful when it inevitably came. In Seattle, Detective Miller worked with local police to canvass the area around the mall. They showed Lily's picture to store employees and distributed flyers with the age progression photo. They reviewed more security footage but couldn't identify the couple seen with the red-haired girl. After 3 days of searching, Miller had to admit defeat. There was no trace of the girl or the couple. They could have been passing through, tourists who were now hundreds of miles away. Or it might not have been Lily at all, just a child who looked similar enough to trigger someone's memory of the missing girl case. Miller flew back to Montana, exhausted and discouraged. He had called Karen each day with updates, and now he had to tell her face-to-face that this lead, like all the others, had come to nothing. Karen had returned from New York the day before. Her television appearance had generated dozens of new tips, all of which would need to be followed up on, though most would likely lead nowhere. Miller drove to the Bennett house to deliver the news in person. Karen met him at the door, her eyes asking the question she couldn't bring herself to speak. Miller shook his head. "I'm sorry." Karen's face didn't change. She had prepared herself for this outcome. "Come in," she said. "I have some coffee made." They sat at the kitchen table, two people united by a shared mission that seemed increasingly impossible. Greg was nowhere to be seen. "The foundation is officially up and running," Karen said, changing the subject. "We've already helped connect 2 families with resources for their missing children cases." Miller nodded, impressed by her strength. "That's good work, Karen. I have to do something," she said simply. "I can't just sit and wait for Lily to come home." As Miller was leaving, he noticed the collection of yellow ribbons tied to the oak tree in the Bennett's front yard. One for each month Lily had been missing. There were now 14 ribbons, faded by sun and rain, but still there, a visual reminder of time passing without answers. "We'll find her," Miller said, as much to himself as to Karen. "No matter how long it takes." Karen didn't respond. She closed the door quietly and went back to work on her foundation website. On her computer screen was Lily's smiling face, a face that was starting to feel like it belonged to someone from another lifetime, a happiness she could barely remember. Outside, rain began to fall, washing away another day without Lily. 5 years had passed since Lily Bennett disappeared from the grocery store in Oak Ridge. In a small house on the edge of Pine Creek, a town about 200 miles away, 13-year-old Amy Peterson sat at the kitchen table doing her math homework. She pushed her auburn hair behind her ears and frowned at the problem she was trying to solve. "Need help?" Susan Peterson asked, looking up from the vegetables she was chopping for dinner. Amy shook her head. "I can figure it out." Susan smiled and went back to her cooking. She was a thin woman with nervous eyes that never seemed to fully relax. She checked the clock on the wall for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Your father should be home soon," she said. Amy nodded but didn't look up from her work. Rick Peterson wasn't really her father, though she had been told to call him that for as long as she could remember. Something deep inside told her that these people weren't her real parents, but whenever she tried to remember her life before the Petersons, she only got bits and pieces. A woman with a warm smile. A blue house. A bedroom with stars on the ceiling. Once, when she was younger, Amy had asked Susan about these memories. Susan had become upset, saying that Amy was confused, that she had always lived with them. When Rick came home that night, they had whispered in the kitchen, and the next day Amy was given medicine that made her sleepy and fuzzy-headed for weeks. She had learned not to ask questions after that. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made Susan jump. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and smoothed her hair. "Put your books away," she told Amy. "Your father doesn't like mess at the table." Amy gathered her schoolwork just as the front door opened. Rick Peterson walked in, a tall man with a beard and cold eyes. He worked as a long-haul truck driver, delivering goods across several states. Sometimes he was gone for days or weeks at a time. Those were the best days in the Peterson house. Everything good here? He asked, hanging his jacket by the door. Yes, dinner's almost ready, Susan replied. Amy's been doing her lessons. Rick looked at Amy. Math? Yes, sir, Amy said quietly, keeping her eyes down. Let me see. He held out his hand for her notebook. Amy passed it to him, her heart beating faster. She had learned that the safest way to live in this house was to be quiet, follow rules, and never draw attention to herself. Rick flipped through her work, nodding slightly. Not bad, he said finally, handing the notebook back. It was the closest thing to praise she ever got from him. During dinner, Rick talked about his latest delivery route while Susan listened and nodded. Amy ate silently, thinking about the dream she had the night before. In the dream, she had been in a store, holding someone's hand. A woman had been calling a name, not Amy, but something else. The name was just beyond her reach, like a word, on the tip of her tongue. Amy? Rick's sharp voice broke into her thoughts. Are you listening? Sorry, she said quickly. What did you say? Rick frowned. I said we're going to visit your aunt in Idaho next week. Susan's sister wants to see you. Amy nodded. She had met Susan's sister only twice before. The woman had given Amy strange looks both times, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. You'll need to pack warm clothes, Susan added. It's colder there. Okay, Amy replied. After dinner, while Susan and Rick watched TV in the living room, Amy went to her bedroom. It was a small room with plain white walls. No posters, no pictures, nothing personal except a few books on a shelf. The Petersons didn't allow photos of Amy. No school pictures, no family portraits. Rick said it was because they valued their privacy, but Amy thought it was strange. From under her mattress, she pulled out a small notebook. It was her secret journal, where she wrote down her dreams and the odd memories that sometimes surfaced. If Rick ever found it, she would be in serious trouble. She had hidden it carefully for over a year now. Amy opened the notebook and wrote the date at the top of a new page. Then she described her dream about the store and the woman calling a name. She added a note about the stars on the ceiling that kept appearing in her memories. Sometimes she wondered if she was going crazy, making up these memories. But they felt so real, more real than her life with the Petersons sometimes. She closed the notebook and hid it away again, careful to make sure it couldn't be seen. The next day, Rick took Amy to the store to buy supplies for their trip. This was unusual. Normally, Susan did the shopping alone or with Rick. Amy was rarely allowed to go places besides the small homeschool group that met once a week at a nearby church. Stay close, Rick warned as they entered the store. Don't talk to anyone. Amy followed Rick through the aisles, keeping her head down as she had been taught. But as they passed the magazine rack, something caught her eye. On the cover of a true crime magazine was the face of a girl. Something about the face made Amy stop and stare. The girl looked familiar somehow. Amy, Rick hissed, grabbing her arm. Come on. He pulled her away before she could read what the magazine said. But the face stayed in her mind. Who was that? Girl? Why did she seem familiar? Later that week, as they prepared for the trip to Idaho, Amy heard Rick and Susan arguing in their bedroom. She crept down the hallway and stood near their door listening. It's too risky, Susan was saying. People might recognize her. Nobody will know, Rick replied. It's been 5 years. Besides, we need to act normal. Taking her on family trips is normal. But what if someone sees her birthmark? It was in all the papers. That's why she always wears her hair down. Stop worrying so much. Amy touched the small mark behind her right ear. A birthmark? What did Susan mean about it being in the papers? She went back to her room, confused and worried. Something was wrong with her life with the Petersons. Something didn't add up. The strange rules, the no pictures, the way they moved to a new town every couple of years. She sat on her bed and tried to remember her life before the Petersons. But all she got were those same fragments. The blue house, the stars, the woman with the warm smile. On the morning they were to leave for Idaho, Amy woke up with a name in her head. Lily. The name felt important, like it belonged to her somehow. She whispered it to herself while getting dressed. Lily. My name is Lily. But that wasn't right. She was Amy Peterson. That's what Rick and Susan had always called her. That's what it said on her homeschool papers. That's who she was supposed to be. As they loaded the car, Amy watched Rick and Susan carefully. They seemed more tense than usual. Susan kept checking the windows as if worried someone might be watching them. Rick put their bags in the trunk quickly, wanting to get on the road. "Get in the car, Amy," he said, his voice harder than usual. Amy climbed into the back seat, her small bag of clothes beside her. She had managed to slip her secret journal into the bag when no one was looking. Something told her she might need it. As they drove away from the small house in Pine Creek, Amy looked back through the window. She had a strange feeling she would never return to that house. Part of her was scared by that thought, but another part, a deeper part, felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this trip would lead to answers about who she really was and why she couldn't remember her life before. The Petersons. Maybe she would finally learn why the name Lily felt so important. The car turned onto the highway, heading west toward Idaho. Amy settled back in her seat, watching the trees go by outside the window. Whatever happened next, she had a feeling her life was about to change. The highway stretched out like a gray ribbon ahead of their car. Amy sat quietly in the back seat, watching the changing landscape as they drove toward Idaho. They had been on the road for 5 hours, and Rick's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He seemed more tense than usual, checking the mirrors often and barely speaking. In the passenger seat, Susan kept looking back at Amy, her face worried. "Are you comfortable back there?" she asked for the third time. Amy nodded. "I'm fine." She had her small backpack beside her, containing the few clothes Susan had allowed her to bring and her hidden journal. Her stomach felt tight with anxiety, but also with something else, a strange excitement she couldn't explain. As the afternoon wore on, the sky grew darker with heavy clouds. Rain began to fall, fat drops hitting the windshield. Rick turned on the wipers and slowed the car. "We need to stop for gas," he said, breaking the long silence. "There's a station coming up in a few miles." Susan glanced at him. "Can't we wait until the next town? This rain is getting bad." "The tank is almost empty," Rick replied sharply. "We don't have a choice." 20 minutes later, they pulled into a small gas station just off the highway. It was the kind of place travelers stopped at on long journeys. Convenience store with a few gas pumps outside, bright lights glowing in the gray afternoon. "Stay in the car," Rick told Amy as he got out to pump the gas. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, but the sky remained dark and threatening. Amy watched through the window as Rick inserted his credit card and began filling the tank. Susan sat stiffly in the front seat, her hands folded in her lap. "Can I go to the bathroom?" Amy asked after a few minutes. Susan hesitated, looking out at Rick, who was focused on the gas pump. "You'll have to wait until Rick is done." "Please," Amy said. "I really need to go." Susan sighed. "Fine, but be quick and don't talk to anyone, understand?" Amy nodded and slipped out of the car when Rick had his back turned. She hurried into the convenience store, the bell above the door jingling as she entered. The store was warm and brightly lit, with aisles of snacks and drinks and a counter where a young woman was working the register. The woman looked up and smiled at Amy. Her name tag read, Beth. She had kind eyes and brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Bathroom's in the back, honey," she said, noticing Amy looking around. "Thank you," Amy replied quietly, heading toward the back of the store. After using the bathroom, Amy paused in one of the aisles. Colorful candy bars lined the shelves, and suddenly a memory flashed in her mind. Standing in a similar aisle, asking someone if she could look at the candy. A woman with a warm smile saying yes. Amy's heart beat faster. The memory felt important, connected to her dreams and the name Lily that kept coming to her mind. She glanced toward the front of the store. Rick was still at the pump and Susan was watching him through the car window. Making a quick decision, Amy grabbed a candy bar from the shelf and went to the counter. She hadn't been allowed to have candy often with the Petersons. This small act of choosing something for herself felt like a tiny rebellion. "Just this, please," she said to Beth, placing the candy bar on the counter. Beth smiled again. "Sure thing. That'll be $1.25. Amy handed over the money Susan had given her for emergencies. As Beth gave her the change, she looked at Amy more closely. "What's your name, honey?" Beth asked casually. Amy froze for a second. "Amy," she said finally, but the name felt strange on her tongue, as if she was telling a lie. Beth tilted her head, slightly. "You look familiar. Are you from around here?" "No," Amy said quickly. "We're just passing through, going to visit my aunt." Beth nodded, but she kept looking at Amy with a curious expression. "Well, enjoy your candy, Amy." As Amy turned to leave, she saw Rick entering the store. His face darkened when he spotted her at the counter. He strode over quickly, grabbing her arm. "I told you to stay in the car," he said in a low, angry voice. "I needed the bathroom," Amy replied, trying not to show her fear. "Susan said I could come in." Rick's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "Let's go. Now." Beth watched the interaction with a frown. "Everything okay there?" she called from behind the counter. "Fine," Rick said curtly. "Just a kid not listening to her dad. Come on, Amy." He pulled Amy toward the door, his fingers digging into her arm. Amy looked back over her shoulder at Beth, who was still watching them with concern. Once they were back in the car, Rick started the engine and pulled away from the gas station quickly. "What were you thinking?" he snapped at Amy. "Talking to strangers?" "She just asked my name," Amy said, rubbing her arm where Rick had grabbed her. "You know the rules," Susan said, turning to look at Amy. "No talking to people we don't know. It's for your own safety." Amy looked down at the candy bar in her hand. "I'm sorry," she said. But inside she was wondering what they were really afraid of. Why was it so dangerous for her to talk to someone? What were they hiding? Inside the gas station, Beth Taylor stood behind the counter thinking about the girl with auburn hair. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though Beth couldn't place it. The way the man had grabbed her arm bothered Beth too. It hadn't seemed like normal parent-child interaction. When her shift ended an hour later, Beth stayed behind to review the security camera footage. She wasn't supposed to do this, but the girl had been on her mind all evening. Something didn't feel right. Beth found the footage from when the girl had come to the counter. She watched the interaction again, noticing how nervous the girl seemed, how she hesitated when asked her name. And then there was the man. His angry expression, the way he grabbed the girl's arm. Beth zoomed in on the girl's face. In profile, with her hair pushed back behind her ear, something clicked in Beth's memory. A few weeks ago, she had listened to a true crime podcast about missing children. One of the cases they discussed was a girl who had disappeared from a grocery store 5 years earlier. The podcast had shown age progression photos of what the girl might look like now. With shaking hands, Beth pulled out her phone and searched for the podcast. She found the episode and looked at the images posted with it. One showed a young girl with auburn hair and green eyes, along with an age progression photo of how she might look at 13. Beth looked back at the security footage, then at the photos on her phone. The resemblance was striking. The missing girl, Lily Bennett, had a distinctive birthmark behind her right ear. In the security footage, when the girl turned her head, there appeared to be a mark in the same spot. Beth's heart raced. Could it really be her, the missing girl from Montana? It seemed impossible, but the similarity was too great to ignore. She didn't know what to do. If she was wrong, she could cause a lot of trouble for an innocent family. But if she was right, Beth remembered the look in the girl's eyes, scared but with something else there, something like a silent plea. She remembered how the man had grabbed her arm, how quickly they had left. Making her decision, Beth found the contact information listed with the podcast. There was a tip line for the Lily Bennett case and the name of the detective still working. Joe Miller from Oak Ridge Police Department. With a deep breath, Beth dialed the number. It rang several times before an older man's voice answered. Detective Miller. Hi, Beth said, her voice shaking slightly. My name is Beth Taylor. I work at the Pine Valley gas station off Highway 15. I think I just saw Lily Bennett. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Detective Miller spoke again, his voice was cautious but urgent. Tell me everything you saw. Don't leave out any details. As Beth described the girl, the man, and the security footage, she felt a chill run down her spine. She had no way of knowing that 150 miles away, in a motel room just across the Idaho border, a girl who had been called Amy for 5 years was lying awake, staring at the ceiling and whispering a different name to herself. Lily. My name is Lily. Detective Joe Miller had not slept in 36 hours. After receiving the call from Beth Taylor at the gas station, he had moved with a speed that belied his 65 years. First, he had contacted the FBI. Then, he had called Karen Bennett. Now he sat in a small motel room just outside of Boise, Idaho, waiting for the most important moment of his career. Across the room, Karen Bennett sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked older than her 42 years, lines of worry etched permanently around her eyes and mouth. But today there was something else on her face. Hope, fragile but unmistakable. What if it's not her? Karen whispered, voicing the fear they both shared. The gas station footage matched the age progression photos, Miller reminded her. And the birthmark behind the ear, that's something only a few people knew about. It wasn't in the public reports. Karen nodded, trying to stay calm. They had been here before. Possible sightings, raised hopes, crushing disappointments. But this felt different. The FBI had tracked the credit card used at the gas station to a Richard Peterson. They had run his background and found multiple red flags, frequent moves, gaps in his history, and most telling employment as a delivery driver who had made regular stops at Franklin Foods in Oak Ridge around the time Lily disappeared. The motel room phone rang, making them both jump. Miller answered it, listened for a moment, then hung up. They found them, he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. They're staying at a cabin near Pine Lake, about 20 miles from here. FBI is setting up surveillance now. They don't want to move until they're sure the girl is safe. Karen stood up, grabbing her jacket. I'm going there. We have to wait, Miller said firmly. The FBI team knows what they're doing. If we rush in, we could put Lily in danger. It's been 5 years, Karen said, her voice breaking. 5 years of not knowing if my daughter was alive or dead. I can't sit here and do nothing. Miller understood her pain, but he also knew the risks. The FBI will call as soon as they're ready to move. They want us nearby, but we can't interfere with the operation. Karen reluctantly sat back down. Minutes stretched into hours as they waited for news. Outside, the day faded into evening, and rain began to fall again, pattering against the motel windows. At the cabin by Pine Lake, Amy, or Lily, sat on a small bed in a room with wood-paneled walls. Through the window, she could see the dark water of the lake and trees swaying in the wind. Susan's sister hadn't been at home when they arrived, leaving a note saying she had gone to visit a friend and would be back tomorrow. Rick had been acting strange all day, checking the windows and jumping at every sound. He and Susan had been whispering in the kitchen, their voices too low for Amy to hear what they were saying. Amy pulled her journal from her backpack and opened it to a blank page. She wrote down the date and then, after a moment's hesitation, wrote Lily instead of Amy at the top of the page. Something had changed inside her since they left Pine Creek. The memories were coming faster now, fragments fitting together, like puzzle pieces. The woman with the warm smile was her mother. The blue house was her home. And her name, her real name, was Lily. A soft knock on the door made her quickly hide the journal under her pillow. Susan entered carrying a mug of hot chocolate. I thought you might like this, she said, placing the mug on the bedside table. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, Amy, Lily replied. She looked up at Susan's worried face. What's wrong? Susan forced a smile. Nothing, honey. Just tired from the drive. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Amy, your father and I have been thinking, maybe we should go on a longer trip. See some new places. What about Aunt Helen? Lily asked. I thought we were visiting her. She's busy, Susan said quickly. We'll see her another time. Your father thinks we should drive up to Canada. Wouldn't that be nice? Lily nodded slowly, though inside she felt a cold fear. They were running from something. Was it because of the woman at the gas station? Had she recognized Lily somehow? When would we leave? Lily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tonight, Susan said. As soon as it stops raining, go ahead and keep your things packed, okay? After Susan left, Lily sat very still, thinking hard. They never did anything spontaneously. Rick planned everything carefully. A sudden trip to Canada in the middle of the night meant something was wrong. She went to the window and looked out at the dark lake. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if she ran away. But where would she go? She didn't even know where her real home was, if the blue house with the stars on the ceiling still existed. Miles away, the FBI team had finished setting up their surveillance of the cabin. Agent Pam Foster, who had worked on Lily's case from the beginning, watched through binoculars as figures moved behind the cabin windows. We have visual confirmation of 3 individuals, she said into her radio. 1 adult male, 1 adult female, and 1 adolescent female matching the description of Lily Bennett. Any signs they're preparing to leave? Asked her team leader. Negative, but they appear agitated. The male suspect keeps checking the windows. The team leader made his decision. We move at first light. Notify Detective Miller and the mother. I want them standing by. At the motel, Miller received the call and relayed the news to Karen. They would drive closer to the cabin at dawn, waiting nearby until the FBI had secured the scene. Try to get some sleep, Miller told Karen. Tomorrow will be a big day. But neither of them slept. Karen sat by the window all night watching the rain and praying that this time, finally, she would get her daughter back. At the cabin, Rick Peterson paced the small living room, checking his watch every few minutes. We should leave now, he told Susan. I don't like this. Something doesn't feel right. It's pouring outside, Susan argued, and it's the middle of the night. We'll attract attention. We'll attract more attention if we wait, Rick snapped. Go wake Amy. Tell her we're leaving. In her small room, Lily heard their raised voices. She quickly grabbed her journal and stuffed it into her pocket. Then she went to the window and tried to open it. It was stuck, the old wood frame swollen. From the rain, she pushed harder and it finally gave way with a loud creak. Cold air and rain blew into the room. Lily looked out at the dark yard sloping down to the lake. Could she climb out? Where would she go? Before she could decide, her door opened and Rick stood there, his face twisted with anger. What are you doing? He demanded, striding across the room. He saw the open window and grabbed her arm. Were you trying to run away? No, Lily said, her voice shaking. I just wanted some fresh air. Rick didn't believe her. He pulled her roughly from the room. Get your coat. We're leaving. Now. Rick, please, Susan pleaded, following them. You're scaring her. Shut up, Rick growled. They found us. I know they did. That woman at the gas station, she recognized her. Who found us? Lily asked, suddenly bold. Who's looking for me? Rick froze, staring at her. Nobody, he said after a moment. Get your coat. But Lily stood her ground. 5 years of fear and confusion had suddenly crystallized into certainty. My name isn't Amy, is it? She asked quietly. It's Lily. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Susan's face crumpled and she began to cry. Rick's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing dangerously. You're confused, he said coldly. Get your coat now, or... A loud bang interrupted him as the front door of the cabin burst open. Voices shouted, FBI, don't move. Men and women in tactical gear flooded into the small cabin. Rick lunged for Lily, but an agent tackled him to the ground. Susan stood frozen, her hands raised, as another agent handcuffed her. Lily stood in the middle of the chaos, her heart pounding. A woman agent approached her gently. "Lily?" she asked softly. "Lily Bennett?" Lily nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "That's my real name, isn't it?" The agent smiled. "Yes, it is, and there's someone who's been waiting a very long time to see you." Outside, as the rain finally stopped and dawn broke over the lake, a car pulled up to the cabin. Detective Miller got out first, then helped Karen Bennett from the passenger seat. Karen stood trembling, watching the door of the cabin. When it opened and a young girl with auburn hair stepped out, escorted by a female FBI agent, Karen's legs nearly gave way. The girl stopped, staring at Karen with wide green eyes. Recognition flickered across her face. Not complete, but enough. "Mom?" she whispered, the word strange and wonderful on her tongue. Karen could only nod, tears streaming down her face. Lily took one hesitant step forward, then another. And then she was running, and Karen was running too, and they met in the middle, holding each other as if they would never let go again. Detective Miller watched, tears in his old eyes. After 5 long years, Lily Bennett had finally come home.